Karen claims her son is entitled to my new house. She was cuffed for felony harassment. The moving truck barely stopped when a woman in pearls planted herself on my new lawn, arms crossed, eyes furious. "You must be the buyer," she said, like the word disgusted her. "I'm Karen Whitfield, HOA president. We need to talk." I hadn't even unlocked the front door and already I sensed something was deeply wrong with this welcome. "This house," she snapped, "was supposed to go to my son. There's clearly been some mistake here." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. Her eyes told me this was only the beginning. "My name is Elise Carter, 34, a paralegal and for the first time in my life, a homeowner. I'd saved for 6 years, survived a divorce and finally closed on a colonial in Meadow Hollow Estates. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, bought fair, bought legal, earned through every extra shift I could find. I never imagined owning it would mean war with a woman who wore Chanel to neighborhood meetings." Karen didn't see a new neighbor. She saw an obstacle between her son and a house she believed was his. Meadow Hollow was a manicured kingdom of matching mailboxes, quarterly newsletters and unspoken hierarchies nobody warned me about. Karen had run the board 9 years. People said her word carried more weight than the actual bylaws. Her son David, 31, still lived at home and everyone quietly knew he'd wanted the Hendersons' old house. The Hendersons, an elderly couple, listed their home after Mr. Henderson passed. I made a clean, full-price offer within days. David had lowballed it by $40,000, assuming no one else would bid on a problem property. He was wrong and I didn't know it yet, but my winning offer had humiliated Karen in front of her circle. The first week seemed almost normal. Neighbors waved. Someone left banana bread on my porch with a kind note. Karen did not leave banana bread. She left a laminated printout of landscaping rules taped to my door. "Grass must not exceed 3 inches, it read, though my fresh sod was barely 1.5 inches. I assumed it was some overzealous welcome ritual. I had no idea it was the opening shot of a campaign. By week 2, a violation notice appeared, fining me $200 for improper mailbox placement. My mailbox was identical to every other one on the street, same post, same paint, same measurements. I called the HOA office. A tired assistant named Priya sighed, "Karen inspects new owners thoroughly. Just pay it." Something in her voice told me she'd said that sentence to other frightened new homeowners more times than she wanted. I paid the fine, chalking it up to bureaucratic nonsense, the price of admission to suburban life. Then came a second fine, then a third, each arriving exactly 4 days after I'd fixed the last violation. My neighbor Tom, retired and blunt, pulled me aside. "She's targeting you, hon, she did this to the Ortegas too." "The Ortegas sold and moved out within a year," Tom said quietly. "Karen made their lives hell until they left." I began to understand this wasn't random enforcement. It was a pattern and I was the newest target. That night I opened a folder on my laptop labeled simply HOA. I didn't know yet how full it would get. I started photographing everything, my lawn, my mailbox, my porch, time-stamped, dated, backed up in triplicate. Karen's next move was bolder. She showed up uninvited during my dinner, clipboard in hand, measuring my fence height. "Regulation is 6 feet exactly," she announced. "Yours appears to be 6'1". "That's a violation, Miss Carter." I measured it myself after she left. 6 feet, flat, exactly to code. She'd been lying to my face. I photographed the fence with a tape measure clearly visible and saved it, dated, into my growing folder. My ex-husband once told me I documented everything like a lawyer. That habit was about to become my weapon. 2 weeks later, Karen sent an email to the whole HOA distribution list mentioning certain new residents who don't respect community standards. She never used my name, but every neighbor who replied, "Hope things settle down, Elise," made her target obvious. I felt my face burn with humiliation reading those replies. She turned my new neighbors against me without saying a word. That's when I met Marisol, 2 houses down, who pulled me aside at the mailbox with a strange, sympathetic look. "She did this to me first," Marisol whispered. "Except mine was about paint color. I still have the emails, if you want them." I said yes immediately. I didn't know it then, but Marisol's evidence would become the first thread in a much bigger case. Marisol handed me a folder of her own, 3 years old, full of identical laminated notices, identical accusing tone. The dates lined up almost perfectly with the timeline of her house going up for sale under pressure. "She wanted my house for her sister," Marisol said flatly. "I just didn't fight back the way you seem ready to." I asked her why she never reported it. She looked at me like the question itself was naive. "Report her to who?" "She is the HOA. She controls the fines, the votes, the paperwork. Good luck." That night I couldn't sleep. Something about "good luck" said with that much resignation lit a fire I couldn't ignore. I decided I wouldn't just survive Karen Whitfield. I would build a case strong enough to end her reign for good. The next morning, I requested official copies of every HOA bylaw, budget report and meeting minute from the past 5 years. Priya, the assistant, hesitated on the phone. "Karen usually handles those requests personally," she said, voice suddenly careful. "I'm a homeowner," I replied evenly. "By law, I'm entitled to those documents. Please send them within 10 business days." She promised she would. I made sure to note the date and time of that call in my folder. 2 days later, an unmarked envelope appeared on my porch, no HOA logo, no return address, just a printed threat. "Some people don't last long in this neighborhood," it read. "Consider selling before things get complicated for you." My hands shook reading it, but I photographed it immediately, bagged it like evidence and called a lawyer the same afternoon. Her name was Nadia Reyes, a real estate attorney recommended by a coworker who'd survived her own HOA nightmare. "This is escalating fast," Nadia said, studying my folder. "Selective enforcement, anonymous threats, this isn't neighborly disagreement anymore. This is harassment," she said plainly. "And if we build this correctly, it could be criminal, not just civil." I left her office that day with a strange mixture of fear and something new, the beginning of hope. Nadia advised me to keep documenting but never confront Karen directly without a witness or a recording device present. "Karen thrives on intimidation," Nadia said. "Don't give her private moments to twist later. Always have proof." I bought a small doorbell camera that week, angled perfectly to capture my porch, my mailbox and my front lawn. 3 days later, footage showed Karen herself sneaking onto my property at 6 a.m., photographing my trash cans. She wasn't inspecting rule violations. She was manufacturing them, staging photos to submit as evidence against me later. I sent that footage straight to Nadia, who smiled for the first time since we'd met. Now we're getting somewhere. The HOA finally sent the requested documents, heavily redacted, missing entire years, conveniently incomplete in the most damning places. "That's not an accident," Nadia said, flipping through the gaps. "Someone doesn't want us seeing certain financial years." I remembered Marisol's warning about Karen controlling the fines, the votes, the paperwork. Now I understood exactly what she meant. At the next open HOA meeting, I attended for the first time, sitting quietly in the back row, watching. Karen ran the meeting like a queen holding court, cutting off questions, dismissing complaints, controlling every microphone in the room. When an elderly resident asked about rising dues, Karen snapped, "If you can't afford this neighborhood, perhaps it's not for you." I watched jaws drop around the room. This wasn't leadership. This was a woman drunk on small, borrowed power. After the meeting, David, her son, approached me in the parking lot, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. "My mom just wants what's fair," he said. "That house should have been mine. Everyone here knows it, even if she won't say it." "It was a bidding process," I said carefully. "I won it fairly." "That's not unfair. That's how the market works." He shrugged, unbothered. "You'll see. My mom doesn't lose. Not in this neighborhood. Never has, never will." It wasn't a threat exactly, but it felt like one, and I made sure to write it down the second I got home. The following week, my HOA account showed an outstanding balance of $800 in unpaid violations I'd never received notice of. Priya, sounding increasingly uneasy on the phone, admitted, "Sometimes Karen enters fines directly without going through my system first." That was the first crack. A witness inside the HOA office, however small, however scared, was starting to talk. Nadia asked me to gently keep building trust with Priya. Frightened insiders sometimes become the best witnesses of all. I brought Priya coffee one morning, just to talk, no folder, no recorder, just kindness she clearly wasn't used to. "She's not just petty," Priya admitted quietly. "The HOA reserve fund is missing money. I've seen the real numbers." My stomach dropped. This wasn't only harassment anymore. Karen Whitfield might be sitting on financial fraud too. "How much money?" I asked carefully, trying not to spook her into silence. "Do you have any proof of it?" "Almost $60,000, Priya whispered. "Marked as landscaping contracts. I've never seen a landscaper who costs that much." I nearly dropped my coffee. $60,000 of community dues, quietly funneled somewhere, hidden under fake invoices. That night I told Nadia everything. She went very still, then said, "Elise, this just became a completely different case. If this is embezzlement," she said, "this isn't just about your house fines anymore. This could end her HOA career entirely." We agreed to move carefully. One wrong step and Karen could destroy evidence or intimidate Priya into silence forever. Meanwhile, the fines against me kept coming, now 4 unauthorized holiday decorations, even though it was barely October. I paid every fine on time, kept every receipt, and smiled at Karen whenever we crossed paths in the driveway. My calm unsettled her more than any argument could have. She expected tears, not documentation, and quiet patience. One afternoon, Karen cornered me by my mailbox, voice low. "You should really consider selling, Elise. This isn't your kind of neighborhood." "What kind of neighborhood is that?" I asked, keeping my phone recording discreetly in my jacket pocket the entire time. "The kind where people know their place," she said, smiling coldly. "David deserves that house. You just got lucky." That single sentence, recorded clearly, became one of the most damning pieces of evidence in Nadia's growing file. I later learned David hadn't just lowballed the Hendersons, he'd pressured their frail, grieving daughter into almost accepting it. The daughter, Rachel, contacted me out of nowhere, apologizing. "David told my parents you'd harass them out if they didn't sell to him first. He'd lied to elderly grieving people to manipulate a sale, all before I'd even made my offer on the house." Rachel agreed to give a written statement. Suddenly this wasn't just about fines, it was about a coordinated scheme. Nadia's eyes lit up reading Rachel's statement. "This shows premeditation, Elise. This wasn't spontaneous anger. This was planned." We now had 3 threads: selective enforcement, financial fraud, and a manipulated real estate deal, all leading back to one family. Karen, unaware how much we already knew, escalated further, convinced her power made her untouchable in Meadow Hollow. She called an emergency board vote to fine me for structural noncompliance, claiming my roof shingles violated color codes. My roof was the exact same slate gray as 6 other houses on the street, installed by the same original builder. I hired an independent inspector, unaffiliated with the HOA, who confirmed in writing that my roof fully complied with every code. Karen ignored the report and pushed the fine through anyway, using her board majority to overrule the actual evidence. "She controls 3 of 5 board votes," Nadia explained. "Her sister and her golf friend rubber stamp anything she wants." That was our next target, proving the board itself was compromised, not just Karen acting alone in isolation. I requested board member conflict of interest disclosures, a legal right buried deep in the HOA's own bylaws that nobody ever used. Karen's sister, listed as independent board member, turned out to share a mailing address with Karen's own house. That wasn't just favoritism. That was a direct bylaws violation, hiding a family member as a supposedly neutral vote. Nadia filed our first formal complaint with the state's HOA regulatory office, attaching every document we'd carefully gathered. Karen, somehow tipped off, showed up at my door that same evening, face pale with barely contained fury. "You think a piece of paper scares me?" she hissed. "I've run this neighborhood for 9 years. You're nobody here." "I'm a homeowner," I said calmly, phone recording from my pocket. "Same as you. That's all I've ever needed to be." She stepped closer, finger jabbing toward my chest, voice rising loud enough for Tom next door to hear clearly. "You will regret ever setting foot in this neighborhood," she snarled. "I will make your life absolutely unbearable, I promise you." Tom, hearing the commotion, stepped outside and later gave a written statement confirming every word of that exact threat. That night, shaking but focused, I added the confrontation to Nadia's file. "This is escalating towards something dangerous," she warned me. "Stay careful," Nadia said. "Desperate people who feel cornered sometimes stop being careful about the lines they cross." I didn't fully understand her warning until 3 days later, when my car tires were slashed in my own driveway. No note, no camera angle catching a face, just 4 flat tires and a message that felt unmistakably clear. I filed a police report immediately, though without direct proof. The officer could only log it as vandalism, unsolved. Still, the timing, 3 days after Karen's threat, became another entry in the growing pattern Nadia was building. Word started spreading through the neighborhood. Other residents, emboldened, began quietly reaching out with their own Karen stories. A young couple, the Patels, admitted Karen had fined them for a wheelchair ramp built for their disabled father. She called it an unauthorized structure, Mrs. Patel said, voice trembling. "We fought it for 8 months before giving up. That violated federal fair housing accommodations law, something even Karen's own bylaws couldn't legally override, no matter how she tried." Nadia added the Patel's case immediately. "This isn't just petty tyranny anymore," she said. "This borders on discrimination violations too." Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Karen targeted anyone who threatened her control, her son's interests, or simply defied her. I began to realize how many quiet, exhausted families had already given up and moved rather than fight a woman like her. "You're the first one who didn't fold," Marisol told me one evening. "Everyone's watching to see if you actually win this." That weight settled heavily on me. This wasn't only my house anymore. It had somehow become everyone's fight now. Karen, sensing the shifting mood, tried a new tactic, sudden, forced friendliness, inviting me to a welcome coffee at her house. I went, recorder in my bag, curious what she was planning behind that suddenly warm, painted-on smile of hers. "Let's be reasonable," she said, pouring tea like we were old friends. "What would it take for you to just sell?" "The house isn't for sale," I said simply. "It never was." "I don't understand why that's so hard to accept." Her smile cracked slightly. "Everyone has a price, Elise. David could offer you a generous number, more than fair market value." "This isn't about money," I said. "This is about my home. And increasingly, about what you've done to get it." Her eyes narrowed sharply. "You don't know what you're playing with," she said, voice suddenly cold beneath the sweetness. As I stood to leave, I noticed a filing cabinet drawer left slightly open, labeled HOA Reserve, Confidential. I said nothing, but Nadia later confirmed that single detail mattered more than I could have imagined at the time. A week later, Priya, growing braver, slipped me a printed spreadsheet showing years of landscaping payments to a company that didn't exist. The company, Greenscape Solutions LLC, had no business license, no website, no employees, only a bank account Karen controlled personally. Nadia forwarded everything to a forensic accountant, who confirmed within days, this was textbook embezzlement, clean and undeniable. "We have enough now," Nadia said, "to bring this to both the state regulator and, frankly, to the district attorney's office." Before we could act, Karen struck first, calling an emergency meeting to vote on removing non-compliant homeowners from the community entirely. It was an absurd, almost certainly illegal proposal, but Karen controlled the agenda, the votes and the narrative in the room. I attended anyway, Nadia beside me for the first time, both of us calm, prepared and quietly ready for what came next. Karen stood at the podium, voice booming with false confidence. Some residents simply don't belong in Meadow Hollow's community standards. Point of order, Nadia said clearly, standing. Before any vote, the board must disclose all conflicts of interest, per your own bylaws. The room went silent. Karen's smile faltered for the first time in public, in front of neighbors who trusted her blindly. This is out of order, Karen snapped, gripping the podium. We are not discussing bylaws tonight. We are discussing standards. Then perhaps, Nadia said calmly, we should discuss why your sister sits on this board while sharing your home address. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors turned to each other, whispering, some looking at Karen with fresh, dawning suspicion. Karen's face went pale, then furious. This is a personal attack, she shouted. I won't stand here and be slandered. It's not slander if it's documented public record, Nadia replied evenly, holding up copies for the entire room to see. Tom stood up unprompted and read aloud the exact threat Karen had made against me weeks earlier. The room erupted into murmurs. Several residents pulled out phones, recording, suddenly aware they were witnessing something historic unfold. Karen, cornered, made her first mistake of the night. She pointed at me and shouted, "This is all her doing. She's manipulating all of you," Karen screamed, "trying to steal what my son worked hard for. She's the real problem here." David never worked for anything, Rachel Henderson called out from the back row, standing up, voice shaking but clear. He lied to my grieving parents, Rachel continued. Told them Elise would harass them if they didn't sell cheap to him first. The room fell dead silent. Karen's own manufactured narrative was collapsing in real time, in front of everyone she controlled. That's a lie, Karen shouted, but her voice cracked and even her closest allies exchanged uncertain, doubtful glances now. Nadia calmly placed the forensic accountant's summary on the podium. Perhaps we should also discuss the missing reserve funds. Karen lunged forward, snatching at the papers. You have no right. Those are confidential HOA financial documents, private property. They're community funds, an elderly resident shouted back. Our dues. We have every right to see where our money went. Karen, visibly unraveling, turned back toward me, eyes wild. You did this. You ruined everything I built here. You built fear, I said quietly, standing for the first time that night. I just refused to be afraid of it. That's when Karen crossed a line no one, not even her, could have taken back afterward. She lunged across the podium, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise, screaming that I would pay for destroying her family. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped backward. Nadia stepped between us instantly, but Karen's grip only tightened, nails digging into my skin. Let go of her. Tom shouted, moving forward, phone still recording every terrifying second of the escalating physical altercation. Karen shoved me backward hard and I stumbled into a folding table, papers and cups scattering across the floor loudly. The room was chaos now, shouting, phones raised, someone calling for security, someone else already dialing the police directly. Karen, breathing hard, seemed to suddenly realize what she'd just done in front of 30 witnesses and several rolling cameras. I didn't mean, she started, but it was far too late for words to undo what everyone had just watched. 2 officers arrived within 11 minutes, called by multiple residents independently, all describing the same violent physical altercation. They reviewed phone footage on the spot, Karen's hand gripping my arm, the shove, the screaming threats caught clearly on audio. Ma'am, you're being detained, one officer said, guiding Karen's arms behind her back as the room watched in stunned silence. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through that meeting hall louder than anything Karen had ever shouted from that podium. Do you understand these charges? The officer asked. Assault and given the documented pattern, we're also filing for felony harassment. Karen's face, always composed, always controlling, crumbled completely for the first time since I'd met her 3 months earlier. "You don't understand," she whispered, tears finally falling. "I just wanted my son to have what he deserved, that's all. He deserved a house he never paid fair market value for." Nadia asked quietly. "Or did you just want control, Karen?" Karen said nothing more, led out in handcuffs past neighbors who'd trusted her judgment for nearly a decade of quiet fear. David, watching from the doorway, looked pale and stunned, realizing perhaps for the first time what his mother had truly done. "Mom, what did you do?" he whispered, following the officers outside, his voice small in a way I'd never heard. The meeting hall stood in stunned silence for a long moment before Priya, of all people, began quietly crying at the podium. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted through tears. "I was just so afraid of losing my job if I spoke up." "You spoke up when it mattered most," I told her gently. "That's what actually stopped her. Not fear. Courage, finally." The following morning, local news picked up the story: HOA president arrested after violent outburst at community meeting. The felony harassment charge, built on months of documented threats, fines and intimidation, carried real legal weight this time. The forensic investigation into the missing $60,000 expanded once financial auditors got full access to records. It wasn't $60,000 after all. It was closer to $140,000, spanning nearly 4 years of fraud. Karen had used Greenscape Solutions to fund private vacations, a leased luxury car and even David's failed side business venture. The district attorney's office added embezzlement and fraud charges on top of the assault and felony harassment charges already filed. David, questioned separately, admitted he'd known about at least some of the fraudulent invoices, though he claimed he never asked questions. "I just thought Mom handled the finances," he told investigators. "I didn't think it was my business to ask where it came from." Ignorance, the prosecutor noted, wasn't quite the same as innocence, especially once bank transfers showed money moving directly to him. The state regulatory office suspended the entire HOA board pending a full independent audit and forced new elections supervised externally. Karen's sister resigned immediately, denying any wrongdoing, though her signature appeared on dozens of the fraudulent expense approvals. Meadow Hollow, once eerily quiet and controlled, suddenly buzzed with residents finally comparing notes about years of quiet, individual suffering. The Patel's wheelchair ramp fine was overturned and refunded within days, along with a formal written apology from the new interim board. Marisol cried when she got her call. The HOA offered to cover her legal costs from 3 years earlier, finally, belatedly. Rachel Henderson thanked me quietly at the mailbox one morning. "My parents can finally rest knowing the truth came out." I gave my full statement to detectives, alongside Nadia's documented file, months of fines, threats, forged reports and manufactured violations. The felony harassment charge alone carried up to 5 years, though prosecutors said a plea deal was likely given her cooperation. Karen posted bail within a day, but community access was restricted. She was legally barred from HOA property and meetings. David, facing his own smaller charges for knowingly benefiting from fraud, moved out of state within the month, alone. The house he'd once believed was his birthright sat quietly in my name, mortgage paid on time, garden finally growing in peace. The new interim HOA board, led surprisingly by Tom, immediately rewrote bylaws to require independent audits and rotating board membership. Priya was promoted to full-time administrator, her honesty finally rewarded instead of punished by the very system she'd feared. I was invited to help draft the new transparency policy, my paralegal background suddenly valuable to the whole neighborhood, not just myself. Slowly, Meadow Hollow began feeling less like a kingdom and more like an actual community, imperfect but finally honest. Karen's criminal trial began 4 months later, felony harassment and embezzlement charges both moving forward despite her lawyer's efforts to delay. I testified, calm and steady, describing 3 months that had once terrified me but now felt like distant, survivable history. The jury deliberated less than a day. Guilty on felony harassment. Guilty on 2 counts of embezzlement and financial fraud. Karen received 18 months in state prison, along with mandatory restitution of over $140,000 to the HOA. She was permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board again, anywhere in the state, for the rest of her life. Watching her sentenced, I felt no triumphant joy, only a quiet, exhausted relief that it was finally, truly over. Months later, I learned Karen had done this exact scheme once before, in a different state, under a different name. A prior HOA board there had quietly settled with a departing family rather than expose her, letting her simply move away instead. That silence, that choice to avoid conflict, had let her arrive in Meadow Hollow and start the entire cycle again. If someone had spoken up back then, Nadia said, maybe none of us would have gone through any of this at all. I thought about Marisol, about the Ortegas, about every family who'd quietly sold and left rather than fight a woman like Karen. Their silence hadn't been weakness. It had simply been exhaustion, the same exhaustion I'd almost surrendered to more than once. But I hadn't surrendered, and somehow that single choice had unraveled nearly a decade of quiet, hidden suburban tyranny. The community held a small gathering that spring, nothing fancy, just neighbors sharing food on my newly finished porch together. Tom raised a toast to the new neighbor who apparently came here to buy a house and stayed to fix a neighborhood. Everyone laughed, and for the first time since I'd moved in, Meadow Hollow actually felt like somewhere I belonged. The cost had been real: sleepless nights, slashed tires, thousands in legal fees, and months of fear I still sometimes feel. But watching Priya laugh freely, watching the Patels' ramp finally accepted without question, made every exhausting hour feel worth it. My house, once a battlefield, finally felt like what it was always supposed to be from the very beginning, a home. Karen Whitfield learned, far too late, that power built on fear collapses the moment someone refuses to be afraid anymore. And I learned that sometimes the quietest, most patient people are simply gathering evidence, waiting for their moment to finally win.